Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Bat of Doom track. We have Megan up next. Megan's a local here, a local graduate actually from University of Nebraska. And she's bounced around between the US government, healthcare, retail, kind of seen slices of different worlds. And I think that her insight on the talk today is going to be pretty interesting. So as usual, please post questions into the Bat of Doom talk track in Discord, and we'll let Megan get started. Thanks, Megan.
So good morning, and thank you all for joining me today. I know that doing this virtually wasn't the optimal solution, but I really appreciate that everybody's here. I was going to talk about vulnerability management, but I was thinking a lot about corn last night, and I was like, oh my God, you know what? What do you do with all of those corn cobs when you're done popping the corn? And I realized that we could solve two problems here. So we're going to be talking about corn cobs, Nebraska's first toilet paper today. And this is really, it's something near and dear to our hearts right now. I'm going to talk about sourcing your supply, proper technique, which is really important, and alternatives for when you do run out of the corn cobs, like vendor worksheets, materials, stuff like that. So I know this is going to be a great ride today, so buckle in. And now that Tim's done having his heart attack, yeah, we're going to talk about vulnerability management. I was thinking about that, and it amused me, and hopefully.
Sorry to break in the middle of your talk, but I do think that you are now required to make a slide deck for the Whose Slide Is It competition for next year.
So anyway, I'm Megan, and for those of you that haven't had a chance to work with me before, I've been in the security industry for about 20 years now. I graduated from UNO in 2002. I actually had the pleasure of working with Dr. Burnham and learning information assurance from him, so it was a good time. I started working as an intern at Ameritrade in 2000, which just blows my mind that it was so long ago. And it was one of those things where they were like, hey, do you want to learn about firewalls, or do you know anything about firewalls? And I'm like, I have no idea, but I'm willing to learn anything. And 20 years later, here I am. So, like Tim said, I worked for the DoD. I worked at Stratcom for a while. So if you've been at Stratcom, you might have seen my name on some documentation. Healthcare, retail. I currently work for NFM here in town. It's been a pretty long, interesting ride over the last 20 years. I also play Pokemon Go, so if you want to be friends, send me your trainer code. We can be buddies. I'm also a certified yoga instructor as of last year, so try to branch out and do cool things. So the theme of this conference being vision, everybody kind of envisions having a really great vulnerability management program, and I have a lot of hindsight, I have a lot of insight, and I want to share that with you. This is going to mostly focus on third-party software vulnerability management. Managing vulnerabilities in your own company's web and software applications can fit into the same overall framework, but you would be using different tools to do vulnerability discovery, and you probably would actually want a separate SSDLC program to manage your risk. So this is going to be focused mainly around third-party patching, not hounding your developers to fix their applications. That's a whole other talk. And I'm going to be covering three main points: why you need a vulnerability management program, how to go about building one, and then navigating the VM lifecycle. And now my slides aren't advancing. Come on. Okay, sorry about that. So why do you need a vulnerability management program? Or why do you need to worry so much about third-party software? Vulnerability management is like an overall aspect of your risk management strategy. Pretty much every organization does risk management, but missing patches aren't necessarily reported as risk. So those are things that should be reported, because missing patches means that somebody could hack you, somebody hacks you, you could lose data, you could pay fines. If you do want fines, not patching will get you fines. HIPAA will fine you. They've done it before, they'll do it to you. So If you work for the DoD, you've got organizations like DISA telling you you've got to patch. So it's important, and it's not just patching. You need a vulnerability management program, because patching is just one small part of the overall program. Also with this, hackers don't want you to patch. You guys have been listening to talks, yesterday. You're making these guys' jobs like so easy. They don't have to even try if you're not patching. They just throw code at you. They stomp around your network. They make you look like a bunch of idiots. Make them work for their money. Make them spend that $1 million on the 0-day exploit that somebody's selling. Just make them work for it. Exploit kits largely leverage existing old vulnerabilities that are years and years old, because they work, because people don't patch. So it's one of those things where, it's you lock your front door when you leave your home, right? It's not going to keep somebody who's really determined from getting in your house, but anybody who's sitting there rattling on doors, it's going to stop them. So it just started raining really hard in here. I hope that's not noisy. So how do you build a vulnerability management program? Phase 1, you get a scanner and you scan everything. No, that's actually a really bad idea. First, you're going to get management buy-in. This is like the hardest step, but it is the most important one, because without your boss, your boss's boss, your boss's boss's boss, you're not going to have the influence, and you're not going to have the tools that you need to accomplish anything. Your efforts to scan and remediate, they will die a slow, horrible death, because you're probably not going to be scanning and patching. You are probably going to just be doing the scanning, and your system admins, your desktop admins, they're the ones doing the patching, and they're not going to prioritize patching unless somebody makes them, or like you bake really, really good cookies or something and you can bribe them effectively. They have other priorities. Patching is not necessarily one of them. And so having management on your side to push them will go a long way in helping you get risk taken care of. Especially if anything goes wrong with scanning, without management saying, look, you guys need to work together. You need to listen. You need to solve this so we can get the scans done. You'll get cut off. They won't let you scan. You're not going to get a good picture of your risk, and you're going to be dead in the water. You won't get the budget for the tools that you need. You won't get the people. You have to have the management support. It is absolutely critical. How do you get that management buy-in? So I'm going to say this a few times, but patch vulnerability management, it's not about patching, it's about people. It's about people hacking. And you have to find what it takes to convince people to support you. So, show them data, show them fines that you could be paying, show them the risk, a report with like the overall level of risk. It might scare the right people, but sometimes it doesn't. They just don't care. So, if you've got a red teaming or a pen testing background, this could be your chance to shine. Make it real for them. Show them how easy it is to get around your network. Make it work for you and for them. So step 2, you're going to write or you're going to fix your vulnerability and patch management policies. You might have one or the other or both. I don't know. You might have neither, in which case you get to start from scratch. That's great. But odds are you probably have these and nobody's following them, so you need to figure out why. Figure out what needs to be done to those things to move them in the right direction, and make sure that all of your stakeholders are involved in writing your policies. These are your network, your server, your desktop administrators, because they have a hand in all the patching. They need to be invested in that process of building those policies, or they will never want to comply with them. So this is another people hacking thing. If you get everybody together in the same room, you agree on how everything's going to work, later on when you say you need to do this, they can't say, well, I didn't agree to that, because they did. So making sure that all the stakeholders involved is really important also. So once you've got your policies down, you need to get the right tools. And we're going to talk more about this later. But getting the right tools and developing your procedures for your team to use for scanning and reporting is a good place to start also. And then the CYA, it's cover your rear end. And you're going to document everything: policies, procedures, risk acceptance, Anybody who's saying, I can't let you scan or I can't patch this system, it all needs to be documented, because risk acceptance is not your job. Unless you're in here and you are a CSO, in which case it might be your job to accept that risk, but for the rest of us, accepting risk is above our pay grade, okay? I'm not here to accept risk. I'm here to tell you about the risk and to make sure that you are informed to make the right decisions, but I don't accept that risk. So CYA, document everything. So there's a few things that I'm going to call red flags that I have heard over my years of doing this. And these are some classics, and these are all things that you really, this might be your sign to just polish up your resume and head for the hills. If your manager is telling you, well, we'd rather pay the fines than patch, well, you know, the city of Atlanta spent like $2.6 million remediating their ransomware attack. Does your boss have a $2.6 million, like, you know, something in their budget that's just, hey, you know, just in case? Because if they're saying this, they probably don't understand what's really at stake, and that's usually not a good sign. Same thing with, we'll just accept the risk. Who is accepting that risk? Because people who do actually accept risk, nobody says that. They don't say, well, yeah, we'll just accept it. That's not the right person there. We patch annually or quarterly or even never, because we just can't have any downtime from rebooting systems, right? And imagine how much downtime you're going to have when you get hit with a ransomware attack and it turns out that the keys don't work, or you know, you got to recover everything from scratch. That is downtime, okay? That is ugly. You don't want the FBI showing up on your doorstep and saying, congratulations, you guys are part of an investigation now. All these things are going to impact the business way more than a couple hours of patching and rebooting on the weekends. So, you know, don't let people make excuses here. This is something that can't be pushed off. It needs to be done, and it needs to be done quickly. There's usually only about like a 2-week window between a vulnerability being released and when exploits for it hit the market. Sometimes that's less, sometimes that's more. But you have a pretty narrow window to get things done, and saying, well, we patch every quarter, that's not going to cut it. We don't have the tools to patch, so we don't. If you're a Windows shop, you probably have the tools because you have SCCM, and as much as people hate that, it does work, and you can use it for third-party patching and not just Windows patching. There's a lot of plugins on it that are inexpensive. There are ways to do it. In my experience, the biggest tools are the people telling you that it's too hard to do it, when in reality, they just don't want to. So you've got to push through those things. And then this was my personal favorite, and this is something that was actually, it wasn't said to me, but it was said to people that I worked with. But they were told, what's the point in patching? There'll just be more patches next month. This guy's security strategy also included keeping all of the servers on Windows NT 4.0 into 2012, because it was his version of security through obscurity. Nobody's hacking NT4 anymore. We're just going to stay here. So yeah, he doesn't work for that company anymore. In fact, he left before I got there, which was good, because I probably would have had to take it outside with him and have a little discussion. But if you're hearing stuff like that from your organization, you know, polish up your resume and run for the hills. You're not going to get anywhere, and you don't want to be on the hook when something bad does happen. So once you have your policies and your management support, you've got to choose your weapon. And if my slide will come up, this thing is lagging really bad on me, I'm sorry. I'm going to talk anyway. All right, so you don't need an expensive tool, but if you have a large number of systems and a large number of vulnerabilities, it helps. And all tools become more expensive the more systems you have. So if you've got an organization with 1,000, 15,000 computers, your patch management, your scanning tool, all that, it's going to be expensive. It just is. It's just a fact of life. If somebody hands you like a single Nessus license and says, congratulations, here you go, that's not going to cut it. So you don't have to have an expensive tool. It will help you get the job done. When you're choosing something to do your scanning with, it's really important to plan this properly because a lot of times you only get to do this once. You need to document your requirements. You need to then, after you document your requirements, talk to the vendors that you want to assess. If you're not even sure where to start there, you can talk to a VAR, you can talk around people in the industry, find somebody to help you narrow down your list of vendors, and then try to stay objective as you assess them. Don't let somebody just, completely wow you with a great presentation and you want to buy it and you get it and you realize it doesn't actually do half the stuff that you need it to do. It's really important to document those requirements first, then talk to your vendors, and then make a decision. And when you're assessing your vendors, there's a lot of questions that you need to ask them. And this is just scratching the surface of that. You could make a giant list of this to go off of. How do they do licensing? How do you do compliance and vulnerability scanning? Are they licensed separately? What about web application scanning? Is that a separate product? Is this going to handle it? You might want to plan for the future also. A lot of vendors are getting into container scanning, APIs, automation, getting into your CI/CD cycles. You may not need it now, but if somebody springs something on you like, hey, we're moving to Azure and we're doing a pipeline and we need to do vulnerability scanning through it, be ready for it. Either with okay, well, this tool doesn't do it, we need to buy this, or we already bought that capability and we're ready to go whenever you are. One of the more crucial pieces in here is how well it does reporting. You're going to spend more time doing reporting than you're going to spend running scans, because once the scans are set up, you're going to run them automatically and you're never going to need to touch it, hopefully, knock wood. But you're going to do a lot of reporting and you need your system to be intuitive and accurate and quick, because I'm not going to name a whole lot of names here, but there's some vendors that will just make this the worst process ever. You will run your report, it will take hours to run, you will get no data, and you'll want to throw the whole thing out the window. So make sure the reporting is good. Make sure when you're talking to them, you're addressing all the requirements. Some of them are going to say no, like, we don't do this. Some of them are going to say, I don't know if we do this. That's not really a good salesperson, huh? But make sure you're documenting all that as you go along. And then, narrow it down to maybe your top 2 vendors and POC. Most of them have cloud-based solutions, so they're pretty easy to stand up and do scans. But POC it, take it for a drive, make sure that whatever they're promising you on paper actually applies when you're using the tool. So I'm going to pull up a slide here that shows, it's kind of a matrix, and these are examples, right? So your scans need to complete in a timely manner. That's a requirement. The scanner must offer an API for automation. Reporting interface must be simple. You could go on for pages with this stuff. This is what you're documenting in your first step. So find out what you need and then weight it based on what is most important to you and your team. So maybe, reporting is most important. Maybe APIs and automation, maybe you don't need that now, so it's less important. So weight all of your requirements and then go through with your vendors and fill those numbers in. Scans must complete in a timely manner. Vendor A, who might be Qualys. Individual assets can take hours to scan and support's not any help. We're going to give them a 1 because the scans don't complete on time. You're getting bad data. It's no good. Vendor B, the scans take 5 to 10 minutes for each asset. They complete in a reasonable amount of time. We're going to give them a 4. So you're going to take your weight. You're going to take it times your score for them, and then you're going to sum that column to get your weighted score. And this is a good way to objectively assess all of your vendors, see how they stack up against each other feature for feature, add notes in there. Make sure that you've documented this, because later on somebody might say, why did we buy this? And you can say, here's why we did it, okay? So you have gone through the whole rigmarole of working with your vendors. You've picked a product, you've got your capital approved, you're ready to roll. Now it's time to take a really good hard look at what your network actually looks like. How distributed is it? Do you have data centers? Are you in the cloud? Do you have impediments like low latency links or firewalls in between sites? If you talk to your network engineers and you're like, what do our links look like? And they say something that sounds like fractional T1, you might want to deploy a scan engine there and not kill their length or their bandwidth by scanning them. So firewalls in between sites, they make a big difference too, because scanning through your firewall, it's really easy to run out of ports and have problems with that. So you want to really take a look at your network layout and make sure that your scan timing, your scan engine placement isn't killing your network. Most vendors have a means of calculating kind of like if I want my scans to complete in 2 hours and I have 500 assets, what do I need to do to make that happen? And that's how you're going to size your scan engines. You're probably going to have one or more scan engines, and making sure that they are sized appropriately is really important also, because if you don't, the scans are going to take forever and you're going to be like, well, crap, we bought this and it's not doing what we need it to do. Be ready to add more resources to your scan engines or add more scan engines to your environment. A lot of vendors don't necessarily license based on the number of scan engines you have. They're licensing based on the number of assets. So this is usually free. It's free because you might have to build VMs or you might have to pay for cloud resources, but odds are you're probably going to need to get more scan engines or beef them up a little bit. Another big thing before you get started with this is credential management. In order to run a vulnerability scan on Windows or Linux system, you need to have local admin access to that system. That can be through a domain admin account. It can be through a local admin account that's pushed down to all of your systems through group policy. There's a few different ways to skin that cat. But the most important thing is that because those accounts are very highly privileged, if somebody finds those hashes on those systems, they can use that on any system. So you need to make sure that you're managing your passwords and reducing your risk from cached credentials. Because if you never change your scanner password and somebody hits one of those systems and pulls the hashes on them, they're going to have full access to your network. Most good vulnerability scanners will integrate with tools like CyberArk or whatever credential manager you're using. I like to automate that, so it pulls the credentials. It will automatically reset them after however many hours it takes the scan to run, and then I don't have to worry about it. It's all automated in the background. The other big issue with your credentials is making sure that you're keeping track of systems that are failing and finding out why. If you have a really large network and you've got people that have too much access to their systems, they'll do things like take the domain admins out of the admin group on their system, and you won't be able to scan it. They're usually also trying to hide something. It's good to know those things. But you need to really track your auth failures and make sure that you're doing your due diligence as you scan to make sure your credentials are being handled properly. This is, you can plan all day long, but the distance between theory and practice is greater in practice than it is in theory. So be ready to have to adjust. So this is kind of a general deployment look. You've got your internal network, you've got a DMZ, or this could be potentially another site. You've got your cloud data center. Put your scanners as close to the systems as they're scanning as you can. If you're strapped for resources, this may not be possible, but as a general rule, this does a few things. One, it reduces your bandwidth that you're using, and two, you don't have to open up your firewalls like super wide open to scan stuff. It's a lot easier to open up one port between your engine and your console than to open every port between your engine and a bunch of systems. Be mindful of shared resources on virtual infrastructure. If your scan engine is stealing resources from somebody else or they're stealing resources from you, it can be a bad deal. So making sure that those resources are reserved for your system can really help. Your server admins are going to gripe about this and they're going to hate it, but it's better than having the scans take days and days and days to run. Another thing too with the whole multiple sites and bandwidth and firewalls especially is you can exhaust your resources on your firewalls really, really quick. So try not to scan through firewalls. It's a bad time for like everybody. I'll talk about that a little bit more. So once you have your deployment plan, you've got your scan engines out and everything, you're going to enter the vulnerability management life cycle. And this cycle is what you're going to do like every day for the rest of your life. unless you like quit your job and become a hermit somewhere, and don't do vulnerability scanning. But this cycle is just it. You're discovering, you're scanning, you're prioritizing, you're remediating, and you're validating. And so we're going to go through each of these steps kind of sequentially here. You're going to discover. How do you decide what you want to scan? Like, you want to scan everything, right? But you can't scan everything, right? You can't, you can maybe discover everything, but you want to scan the whole class B? Nobody wants to do that. If you're a network engineer, say, yeah, we're using RFC 1918 space. Do you know how long it takes to scan like a /8? It takes forever. You can't do it. So talk to your network administrators, like see if you have an IPAM that can give you a look at what actual IP ranges you're using, and limit it to just discovering on those if you can, because otherwise your discovery scans will take forever. Try to figure out what you want to scan and when. Break it up into small pieces, like, I'll do this site on Monday, I'll do this site on Tuesday, I'll do this site on Wednesday. Try to keep it so that your scans don't take more than, say, like 8 hours or so to run, because if you want to do your discovery at night when people aren't on the network and you're not hogging bandwidth, you want to keep them pretty narrow. So you're going to discover pretty much everything, but you're only going to actually vulnerability scan the assets that you need to vulnerability scan. You're probably not made of money. Some places you might have unlimited licensing, and then you don't even need a discovery. You can just vulnerability scan everything, and it's great. But odds are you're gonna have to break it down more than that. When you do actually run your discovery scans, make sure your vendor has the option to do operating system detection. It is kind of like a canary in a coal mine, because it will show you where you have problems with your scanning. If you're not getting a good operating system off of that asset, odds are something like your firewall or your endpoint firewall, your endpoint protection is shanking you. And you're going to have to try to figure out like what you need to adjust in order to make the scans run. You're probably going to need to whitelist your scanner somewhere. You're probably going to need to check your STIGs or whatever baselines you're putting on your system to make sure it's compatible with how you're running your scans. So if you get like no operating system back from something and you know it's a Windows system, it's time to start digging and find out why. The other thing that you need to do after you scan is go through the results. You'll get, your network engineers will give you an IP range that's actually like a site-to-site VPN with another company. You can't scan it. And it'll send TCP resets back, and your scanner is going to think that that's a live asset because it got a response. Well, yeah, it got a response, but it got a TCP reset. That's not a live system. That's bogus. So make sure you're going through those discovery scan results and pulling out anything that's just a TCP reset. Maybe it's a VIP that points to more than one system. You want to scan the systems, you're not scanning the VIP. And you'll get like dead DNS names if your DNS cleanup isn't good. It'll do a reverse DNS lookup on an IP and it'll come back with an asset name, but there's not an actual asset there. Well, there's no point in scanning it and using a license on that if you don't have to. You also need to build your vulnerability scan lists. Figure out how you want to group your assets. You might do it by operating system, by site, by subnet. Make sure your credentials are assigned properly to those things. Otherwise, you're gonna, maybe you've got one set of credentials for servers and one for workstations. Well, you're gonna have problems, okay? You gotta make sure that all of your credentials are assigned properly. So you have your discovery scan list now, and it's time to scan. And we are going to work on something that we call avoiding resume generating events, or finding a new job because you took the network down. This is another big CYA thing. You've got to document. You have to work with the business on your scheduling. Follow your change control processes. Notify everybody every time you do something, because if you don't and something goes wrong, you're the one who's in trouble for it. So there is no such thing as under notifying here. You just have to push it and push it and push it. And then if, like I said, if something goes wrong, well, I told you I was running the scans, it went through change control and you approved it. What more do you want me to do? You also want to be kind of proactive about testing things that are likely to break, because you will break stuff. There's going to be things on your network, old printers. If you work in a place like a hospital or something, there's all sorts of specialty equipment that has an IP address that may not react very well to scanning. if you're walking into an organization that already has a program and they've done this, talk to people, find out, like, what happened the last time you tried this? Because they'll just say something like, oh, you can't scan it, it's going to break. Well, why? Like, what do we need to do to fix this? Try to avoid letting the business dictate your requirements. Don't ask open-ended questions like, when do you want me to scan? That's a bad question. A good question would be, I'm going to scan these systems on a weekly basis. When do you want me to scan them? Like Monday at 8 p.m., Saturday at 12 a.m. at midnight. Put that in front of them as options to choose from. Don't just leave it open-ended. I've got kids, right? And one of the first things I learned with dealing with my kids is that they do stuff like, you're like, what vegetable do you want for dinner? And they're like, none of them, I want candy. Would you like peas or would you like carrots for dinner? It's easier for them to choose between options, and it gives them less wiggle room to try to weasel out of things than if you just give them options and hold them to it. And I kind of mentioned this already, like, you can't scan it, it'll break. Find out why. Work with your scan vendor, work with your equipment vendor. Some stuff you're just, you might need to exclude ports from scanning. Printers especially. Printers don't like being scanned on certain ports because they'll start spitting out pages of garbage, and then somebody's going to call you and freak out because they think somebody's hacked the printer and it's actually your vulnerability scanner hitting it. And then they're going to be mad that you wasted like a whole ream of paper. So be a little proactive about testing things, and don't take, you can't scan it, it's going to break as the final answer. And the last piece here is what I call the scanner's dilemma. No one wants you to scan during business hours in case it causes an outage. But if you cause an outage during non-business hours, no one's around to fix it. So making sure that you're talking to them and the on-call person knows what's going on, they know how to reach you. Cover your bases there, CYA, make sure that everybody knows what's going on and that everybody's agreed to your terms. And pick a schedule and stick to it. I personally like scanning once a week for vulnerabilities. You may scan less or more frequently than that. It's kind of up to you. But either way, make sure that it's on a regular basis so people know, hey, it's this time, it's this day, we're having an issue. Oh yeah, that's right. Didn't Megan say something about scanning every weekend? Let's call her and find out first. So take care of that. And then once you do finally get your scan results, double check your results. Like, if I had a buck for every time somebody was like, oh, the scan didn't find any vulnerabilities. No, that never happens. That like literally never happens. The scans never come back with no vulnerabilities. There's going to be something. So odds are your credentials are wrong, or your endpoint firewall is shutting you down, or something else is shutting you down. You gotta dig into it. If the results don't make sense, figure it out. You'll get into fights with your system administrators. Like, you're gonna get stuff like, Big Fix says that there's no patches required on this system, and the scanner is saying, yes, there is. Who's right? Who's your source of truth? Most good vulnerability scanners will let you see what check it's running exactly. It might be looking for a certain file. It might be looking for a version number on a file. It might be looking through the Windows registry for certain variables. Sometimes those don't match. Sometimes the scanner is wrong. I've seen this before. It happens. So make sure that you're kind of double checking your work here, because if something doesn't make sense, there's probably a reason why, and you might need to talk to your scan engine vendor and say like, hey, your check is wrong. You guys need to fix this. And also talk to your system admins before you hand them like a whole bunch of tickets. A lot of vulnerability management suites, they'll be like, hey, we can plug into ServiceNow and we can automate your ticketing. And then you assign like 3,000 tickets to your system admins, and then they show up at your door with torches and pitchforks, and they want your head on a stake because you just assigned them 3,000 tickets and you destroyed their metrics. Don't be that guy. Everybody hates that guy. Don't be that guy, okay? Talk to them, give them aggregated lists. This is where your reporting is important. If it's something that doesn't make sense, talk to them first. Don't just start throwing tickets at them, because they're going to hate you. And again, this is about people not patching. So do your people hacking here. Work with your admins. Make sure that that they agree with the findings and that there's not some inconsistency in there before you turn around and start throwing requirements at them. So this is tough because, you know, maybe you work for a place that's got this down pat and your scans are good and your patch management's great. And then, I mean, if that's the case, I'm not sure why you're here. Maybe you should give this talk too. But most of the places that I worked at, like you come in and you start scanning and you've got a million vulnerabilities and you're like, I don't even know where to start with this. How do I determine what is the highest risk to the organization and how do I charge forward? So generally when I look at scan results, there's two types of findings. There is the patch that all of the systems are missing, the new vulnerability that just came out, and there's the system missing all the patches. And the first one you need patch management for. The second one, a lot of times you just need to get your admins to hunt those things down and just re-image them, get them off the network. If they're not getting patched, they probably have a full disk or their STCM agent's broken or some other agent's broken that's doing the patching. You can reduce a surprising amount of risk by finding the systems that are causing the biggest problems and just nuking them from orbit. Not every vulnerability that your scanner will come back with is patchable per se. There will be things like enforcing SMB signing that are actually managed by group policy, not patching. So talk to your server and your desktop admins, make sure your group policies are following good system baselines. You can use STIGs, you can use, like, you know, CIS Institute has baselines. Not every finding can be patched. Some of it's group policy. Make sure you are working both angles, patch management and group policy. A lot of times it really feels overwhelming. So find one thing that seems manageable and start there. I've done it where we said, you know what, we're gonna get rid of all the CVSS 10s. We're gonna run a report, get every CVSS 10, and we're gonna just take care of those. And it was a place to start. It wasn't perfect, but it's a place. So one of the other things that you can do is prioritize based on cost and risk. So your cost is kind of a function of your user impact, your operational costs, and your monetary costs for patching. Monetary costs might be a third-party patching solution. It might be professional services to perform upgrades on your equipment if it's an operating system that needs updating and it's like your VPN or your firewall. And operational cost is not just like how much does it cost to reboot the system to patch it. How much time are your admins spending packaging patches and pushing them out? If they're doing manual patching, your operational costs can be like really, really high. And if there's downtime from a patch or there's a high risk of downtime from a patch, you want to make sure that you're accounting for that in your cost measurement. And then risk, and most of us are pretty familiar with the basic risk calculation. To have a risk, you need a vulnerability, a threat, and an exposure. You already have the vulnerability, you have the scan gave you your vulnerabilities. It'll also usually give you your CVSS score, the vendor's recommendations, the vendor's risk rating. Microsoft ranks things as critical, severe, etc. Use that to kind of figure out what the overall vulnerability level is, and then your threat. Depending on what industry you work in, you could be facing nation state actors, or you could just be facing mostly script kiddies. So try to figure out what your threat level is and factor that in, and then your exposure. Where do your assets sit? How protected are they? What is the actual exposure? Because some of these come out and they're like, the sky is falling, this is horrible. I don't know why this just did that. Oh my gosh. So see if you can reduce your risk. Risk can be very high. It can also be reduced pretty easily. You've got things like your network and host-based IDS, IPS. You've got virtual patching. You've got application whitelisting. You've got group policies that can be used to restrict where things can run and enforce things like UAC. So local firewall policies. You can even do things like just, maybe it's a big amount of trouble to push out patches to something. Do you even need the software on that system in the first place? Just go uninstall it. This is kind of another matrix that you can use to try to prioritize your patching. So you've got your risk on the top, you've got low, medium, high, you've got cost on the side, low, medium, high. the items that fall into this like highest section here are the ones that don't cost a lot to patch, but have the highest amount of risk. These are your quick, easy wins, something you can knock out of the park, reduce your risk quickly without having to do a lot of planning and messing around with stuff. Lower prioritization doesn't mean it shouldn't be done. It just means that you're not doing it right now. And the more you can reduce your risk, the less ugly this looks. So if you can take something that's a high risk and a high cost and reduce the risk on it down here, you're going to feel a lot better about yourself. So when I'm doing this, my top priorities in general for patching are things like Windows operating system and browsers. These are, you just got to do it every month. There's always something. You got to patch IE, you got to patch Edge, you got to patch Windows. Get it done. They're big fat targets. We also have what I've called the unholy trinity: Acrobat Reader, Flash. I thought Flash was supposed to be dead. It's not. It's still on all your systems. Why? And Java. Java is horrible. Java like gives me nightmares because it is just, it is, they went and they changed their whole licensing model, so you got to pay for your Java licenses. So up to a point, you can go with Oracle's Java, and then you have to pay to upgrade it. Or you can move to Open Java, and if you want to watch your developers start to sweat, tell them they need to start testing Open Java with all their source code, because they're not going to want to do it. So Java is just a big problem, and there's a lot of systems out there that rely on old versions of Java to run. You got to find them and figure out what you can do to reduce the risk on them if you can't patch them. Anything that's unsupported or like really out of date for your operating systems, your software, like you're still running 2000 server rate, you're gonna have a bad time. Someone's gonna take you down. You gotta get rid of that crap now. Nobody wants to do it, but you gotta do it. Your edge devices are supremely critical. Routers, firewalls, VPNs. You saw what happened to Citrix earlier this year, right? The Vuln, I think the patches came out in December, and people were using it, but you're like, I don't want to have to reboot it. I got downtime for my users. I don't like testing. What if something goes wrong? We're gonna leave it. You can't just leave it. Somebody's gonna find it and they're gonna take advantage of it. So anything that sits on your network edge is a very, very high risk, very high priority. You've got to do it. And then take a look at your systems with sensitive information. Domain controllers, always up to date on patches. Database servers, especially anything that's containing PII, PHI. Your HR, your payroll people, like their computers, you don't want them to be out of date on patches if you can't help it. Sorry, I need a drink quick. So plunging forward into remediation. You thought it was hard to get people to scan. It's harder to get them to remediate. And this is like a really big people hacking thing, because you got to make friends with everybody. No one ever wants to reboot. How do you handle it when the business insists on 100% uptime? They can't have 100% uptime. I'm sorry. Like if that system has to be up all the time, just be glad that you found it before the hackers did. Try to have a regular cadence so that people know when the reboots are coming. Again, it's the same thing with the scans. I know the scans are coming. I know the patches are coming. Leverage your centralized patch management to try to do as much automated as you can. Again, you may not have a lot of good options, but SCCM is better than nothing, barely, but it does still work and you can still use it. How do you deal with mobile systems, right? Like you got laptops on the network. It's hard to scan them. It's even harder to patch them if people aren't on site. That might be something where you need to look at a vulnerability management solution that includes patching and maybe has an agent that you can put on those systems to get them patched up to date on time. There's also legacy systems. Everybody's got like that dirty old AS400 in the data center that they don't want to talk about. You got to do something about that too. You got to take care of it. Have a plan to document exceptions. You've got like that building control software and it's got to run on like Java 6 update 15, which if you were around in like, 2010 or so, like that should be like, oh God, don't talk about Java. But you got a system and this is all the vendor supports and I can't make the vendor update their stuff. Maybe that system doesn't need to be online all the time. find ways to reduce your risk, even if you can't patch, and document your exceptions. There was this thing that we did in the DoD. It was called a Plan of Action Milestones, or a POAM. So it was not a get out of jail free card for your system administrators. They had to fill it out. You had who was accountable for it, and they had to have a plan to patch that stuff. It wasn't just, oh, I'll put in a POAM and I can just ignore this. It is, okay, well, in 30 days we're reviewing this. Have you patched these systems? It's been 90 days. Have you patched these systems? Sometimes you push the patches out and it breaks stuff, and you need more time to roll everything back and do more testing, work with the vendor, find out what's wrong. That's okay. You put in your POAM, you revisit it. You don't just say, well, they can't patch it, so we're just going to ignore it. Make sure you've got documentation there. And again, anticipate problems with remediation. I can't count how many times Microsoft has rolled out a patch and 2 days later rolled it back because it caused a whole bunch of problems. So be ready for the patches to have bugs. Be ready to patch your patches. It happens. And your system admins, like they'll try to weasel out of this stuff like any way they can too. So make sure you're holding them accountable and staying on them to keep up on this stuff. So you're doing your validation after supposedly you're doing your remediation. And it's basically remediate, rescan, and repeat. Make sure that when they say that something is patched, that it is actually patched. They may think it is, then the scanner says no. Well, again, why? Make sure your findings are still good. If you can, try to scan your lab environments or test systems before things are rolled out to production to make sure that what they updated actually fixes the problem. This is more a problem with like firmware and hardware, firewalls, routers and stuff. You may not want to update to the most recent version of code that your vendor has released because you're not getting paid to beta test their software. Make sure that you are keeping track of what your system admins are doing so they don't put a new version on there that's actually got just as many vulnerabilities as the old version. Make use of APIs and self-service. Sometimes they're proactive and they want to do the scans themselves. Give them access to the tool. You can do that. Track the time it takes to remediate, because you're going to use this to build up ammunition to say, I need better tools. I need more resources. Find out how many hours they're spending doing this stuff. And some places you're going to have a requirement for 100% compliance. You're probably never going to hit it because some jerk has a laptop in his desk drawer and it's been off the network for 6 months and they plug it in and congratulations, you've got a system with vulnerabilities on your network. What are you going to do? So make sure that you've got a plan to deal with that stuff when it does hit the network. And maybe that's NAC. NAC can always force them to patch before they connect to the network. See if you can find ways to deal with that. Sometimes it's just a little bit of creativity. Sometimes you just have to accept that, you're never going to actually hit 100% compliance unless you put agents on every system, and that might be so expensive. You just have to accept that. So some overall final thoughts on this. Track your progress. Show your report data to your manager. Show that you are making progress and you're reducing risk. Having a chart that does like this, like, oh, here's our number of vulnerabilities. We're doing good. Oh, it went up a little bit. Well, that's because Patch Tuesday happened. We're going down. We're going up. Keep track of that trending data. It's very useful. Make sure that management knows who is doing the work, because you're doing the reporting, you're doing the scanning, but odds are your sysadmins are doing the hard work. Make sure they get credit for that work. Make sure that you are showing gratitude to them. That could be baking cookies. That could be whatever your organization does for recognition. Making sure that they get recognized keeps them on your good side, okay? Don't give up. Collaborate. Try different angles of attack. Nobody gets a medal for vulnerability management. Nobody does. Nobody gets a medal for patching. It's like cleaning toilets. You got to do it, but nobody wants to do it, but you got to do it anyway. So try to keep at it and keep fighting, and be proactive. Making your vulnerability scans part of your system build process, or making sure that they are patching their gold images before they're imaging servers and desktops means that they don't sit on the network for an undetermined amount of time before they are actually up to date on patches. So final slide here, once this pops up. In a nutshell, there's really no one size fits all in vulnerability management. Every organization is different. Be ready to change your approach. don't let perfect be the enemy of good, or even better. Like incremental change is better than no change at all. And keep fighting the good fight. You know, the real TLDR is that vulnerability management is about people, not patching. Patching a system isn't hard. Getting the admin to patch the system is hard. Getting the business to support your efforts to remediate, it's hard. You have to work the people angles in order to get this done. So thank you for listening. If you have any questions, comments, let me know. I'm on Discord. I don't tweet. I never really got into it. I'm part of the generation that kind of hit before that. So I like emails, but I haven't gotten on Twitter. So
nobody likes emails.
Maybe I'm weird. I don't mind chat either, but I could never get into Twitter. It's just too much noise. Too many Russian bots pretending to be people.
It's funny because that was actually the first question that was asked towards the beginning of your talk. What's Megan's Twitter? So you've answered that question already. I wasn't going to ask it, but you've answered it anyway. There are a couple of pretty on-point questions here. We got time to tackle a few in the video. Andy Goblins is asking, in my experience, demoing exploits doesn't convince people of how important patching is. What are other ways we can help people understand why patching is actually worth the effort?
It depends on who you're demonstrating this to. So I actually had a case, this was web application vulnerability scanning, and I had a system admin that said, this isn't a big deal, you can't exploit it. And so I did.
Was it PHP?
But I didn't send it to him. I was working for the DoD at the time as a contractor, and I sent it to one of my managers. And I said, you know, this guy keeps pushing back on me. Here's a workable exploit for it. And they talked to his manager and they got it done. Because sometimes I can't do it, but if you scare the right people, they can make it happen. It's people hacking again. You have to keep changing your approach. If you've got a compliance branch in your company and you can get compliance on your side and show them the risk, sometimes they can put the pressure on people and say, you know, we can't just keep ignoring it.
That's interesting when you bring up compliance and sort of other teams. The dynamics, the business dynamics or enterprise dynamics, I'm sure play into this in many different ways. But we actually have a related question about you know, the priorities or the incentives of different teams to sort of do different things. The question specifically is, how do you deal with teams that try and hide from your scans? You know, removing banners from web servers, like understanding how your scan engine works so that they can be sort of internally compliant, but sort of missing the point of the scan.
You know, that probably falls a little bit more into like web application vulnerability or application scanning, and that's, yeah, that is a problem, and that might be something where you need more of a hands-on approach to it to find their issues and getting into that SSDLC business. For the most part, for third-party vulnerabilities, it's hard to hide that your system has vulnerabilities, because if I can do a credentialed scan of it, I can probably find anything that you're trying to hide. The issue that we usually see more than somebody intentionally trying to hide something is that you run into that, if I patch it, it will break. Or I don't want to patch it because this happened one time. And you have to fight through those issues a lot more than you have to fight through people trying to hide stuff from you.
I guess in that similar, like, of course, if you sort of know it's there, you can discover it somehow. You can try and find what evasions they're trying to employ, or however,
yeah,
whomever is trying to hide.
Yeah, the bigger evasion I see is like people trying to do things that they're not supposed to do on their work laptops and taking the domain admins group out of there so they can't keep tabs on them. So there's usually bigger problems going on if you've got people trying to hide stuff.
Right. So in that case, where they have local administrative or elevated privileges, they can sort of tinker with some of the controls as well, or the visibility.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
and
similar to that.
Another thing too, not every scanner scans every directory on your system. So we actually ran into this where if you install something like Java in a non-standard directory, the scan engine wouldn't find it as a finding.
Sure.
So you have to also be aware of what your technology is doing for you.
I guess in a similar sort of technology kind of question, do you, Megan, have a preference on how you actually do the scans? Do you like to do like a network scan, or use an agent-based scan, or professional services, or like what's your sort of preference?
This is your mileage may vary because it depends on your organization. Um, I like having a local console. I'm not a huge fan of cloud-based services. It's a lot of data about your system that you're sending up to somebody else's cloud that you may not have complete control over. So I like to have some console on my network. Agent-based is nice because it's very reliable, it's very consistent. It can work when the systems are off of your network. So if you're in an environment where you really have stringent compliance regulations and you need to know what vulnerabilities are on systems, having an agent is an absolute must. I a monthly basis, kind of rotating through different sites and stuff. Depending on the size of your network, you could do that more often. But I do vulnerability scans once a week because it lets me know if my patch management is failing on me. So if the guys are saying we're rolling stuff out and I'm not seeing numbers go down, there's a breakdown somewhere there.
One more question, which is a little, I mean, this is all sort of related, but this one's a little bit orthogonal, I guess. Do you recommend pushing for network segmentation if you don't already see that in whatever network we're currently talking about? Especially for like the unsupported systems or the out of date systems, or like the printers that you mentioned earlier,
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. In fact, one place that I worked, we actually created a separate network for all of our vendors and the crap of theirs that we couldn't patch. We locked them off behind a firewall. It let them get to the internet to do things that those systems need to do to get the internet, but it did not give them access to our internal network at all. So, it's a risk mitigation. It is not removing it entirely, but there are things that you can do with ACLs and firewalls to push that stuff into a corner and make sure that if it does get owned, it's not being used to get into your stuff.
Sure. Yeah, sounds great. Great stuff, Megan. Thanks for the talk, and thanks for making the move to virtual with us.
Yeah, no problem. I'll be in Discord all day. Feel free to send me a private message if you've got questions about something. I really want to see discussion around this because, like I said, nobody gets a medal for it. It's ugly and nobody wants to do it, but it's really important. You got to do it. So let's talk to each other and find solutions.
Yeah, let's get it done. All right, thanks again. And for those sticking around in the Bat of Doom, we've got a couple of short talks coming up before our midday break. So we'll be right back.